Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I will be discussing Ship of Magic, the first book in the Liveship Traders trilogy by Robb and Hobb. Now, I just recently read the Farseer trilogy and absolutely loved it, and then started on the Liveship Traders trilogy read-along with Megan over at Megan's Reading Revelations. I will link down to her channel below. It's been really fun kind of going through and discussing this with everybody else with it. There will be a live show that she is hosting discussing Ship of Magic as well. So definitely make sure to check that out. That is on April 2nd. And I will have a link to that as well down in the description. But let's talk about Ship of Magic, because I have never really read something quite like this. And Robb and Hobb, I commented after Farseer, had very much already jumped up into one of my favorite authors, and I don't think she's going to ever come down from there. This book is just so different. It didn't really feel like anything that I would normally read from the description, and that's what's so interesting too. And everybody says that this is even better than a Farseer once you get through it. So I'm quite excited. But this is a very unique and interesting book. This takes place in the same world. It's still within the realm of the Elderlings, which is what the kind of the world Farseer, as well as this and some other books, are all in that Hobb has written. It takes place quite far in the south, and in Farseer, in the Six Duchies, there's referenced in the south the Chalkid states. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, and also Bingtown. And a lot of this takes place in Bingtown, but Bingtown is like the very north of the map of what we're looking at here, and so we're looking at all of the different south there. And there's a few different storylines that are going on. This is in third person, so it's not first person POV like Farseer was. It's third person, and we get several different POVs as well. So it's already, the story itself is being told differently. But what our main story takes place with the Vestrit family, who are a Liveship Trader family in Bingtown. And what Liveship actually means is literally it's these ships that are magic. It's these ships that basically, through magic, they're created from a wood called wizard wood. And after 3 generations of a family, so 3 different basically members of a family. I don't know that it necessarily has to be generations, but three family members die on the ship. It will then quicken, and it's this carved figurehead that will come alive, and it actually has like a personality. It has the memories to an extent of the people who worked on it and then died on it. And it's this, it literally is to families pay these off for generations, because they take out kind of a loan to get it. And so that's kind of the setup. And we're told the Liveship Trader families of Bingtown, they originally from the satrap down in Jamila City, which is very, very far south, were given a monopoly of this area. Only they're allowed to trade, only they can get live ships. They have to be one of these trader families. And we don't get into it a ton, but there seems to be quite a bit of other kind of odd or mystical things that are happening around Bingtown and in the Rain Wilds. And so that's something that we're just kind of starting to take a peek at. This was so interesting because it's a completely different area. It's places that we know, but it feels entirely different. Farseer was a little bit more kind of like medieval feeling, whereas this is very much like a Victorian era story, even though they take place roughly around the same time. This is probably toward the end of the Farseer trilogy based on some references that are made, but it's really, when it talks about that, they look at them differently. There was actually a joke that they look at the people from the Six Duchies as a little better than barbarians, and my favorite line about it was, they get married in front of rocks, for God's sakes. It's Saw is the god in this, but that's what they say, and just kind of making these little offhand references, which were great. If you read Farseer, because you definitely got them. I know some people just start right here, but it has such a different feel with that Victorian era, and I really feel like kind of the similar way to how Farseer went. We're really going to delve deeper and deeper into the world as we get further in this, and I think then some of the later series that she's also written, Realm of the Elderlings, will probably do even more. But so the kind of Bingtown, the Vestrit Trader family, what we see the main plot there is Ephron Vestra, who is the kind of the male patriarch of the family. He is the captain of the ship until he gets the life ship Vivacia, until he gets very sick. And so with him getting sick and then dying, there's a struggle between who should actually get the ship. He's got one daughter, Althea, and she has been on the ship, and she always thought that it would go to her. But he also has another daughter, Kefria, who has children, is married to Kyle Haven, who we're going to definitely talk a bit more about later. And so basically his wife ends up convincing him that the ship and everything should go to the eldest daughter, Kefria, because she has a family to provide for, and it wouldn't make sense to kind of move them around. And so that kind of happens. And so Althea, her entire world is thrown upside down because she's not getting the ship. And there's a lot of turmoil. It feels at some point seriously kind of like Victorian era period piece soap opera-y at points, which I know, at least to me, does not sound good, but it's just so well written. We also have Kefria and Kyle's other son, Wintro, who ended up being one of my favorite characters, who's training to be a priest, but he's recalled from his temple. I can't think of the word that he used, but he's recalled from his temple. Because Ephron Vestra is dying, and he ends up not quite getting what he wants as well. There's a lot of this family turmoil, and that's kind of the bulk of this main plot line. And it's really interesting the way it works out, because with family turmoil, that's not even that hard of a word, guys. This is going to be an interesting review. With family turmoil, there's always multiple sides to the story, and Hobb, once again, she'll give you something that you feel like, oh, this is the situation. I'm supposed to root for this character, and this character is the bad guy. But then she'll show you why maybe the person that you think you're supposed to root for is not that great, and why the bad guy maybe has reasons and isn't that bad. And there are definitely still, like, there are good and bad characters, but they feel so real because you don't have the mustache twirling, I'm just evil, or like the I'm perfectly good. These are all really flawed characters, and that was something that happened in Farseer too, where all of the characters are flawed, and so you don't have, for the most part, good and bad. Even like the worst characters get some sort of explanation, some sort of a backstory as why they are that way. And that made all of the interactions just fascinating. We also have a couple of other storylines, one of Kenneth, who is a pirate captain, and especially early on, his parts were the most fun to read for me, probably because it wasn't Victorian soap opera-y, but he is going on his quest. He eventually wants to become the king of the pirates, even though everyone knows pirates have no king. So a lot of really, really interesting passages with him. And then we also, starting very early on, have POV from sea serpents. And we don't find a ton about them in this first book. I think there's going to be a ton more. I think they're going to be very, very important from the sound of it. But the sea serpents that are traveling because they have to basically go somewhere to find out their memories and find out who they are. And there's all kinds of hints more to their nature that are going to be some big things. I don't want to say anything. I actually accidentally spoiled myself for this. I can definitely see what was happening afterwards, but I gave myself a little bit of a spoiler trying to look up what the sea serpents look like. So don't look up what the sea serpents look like. Just look at the old covers, because I think maybe Madship, the old Madship cover, has a sea serpent on it, and I should have just looked at that, and that would have been fine. But yeah, I don't recommend Googling, or you may get some spoilers, but we follow them as well. So it's a very diverse group that we're looking at with everything that's going on. This was just such a well-written book. And I will say, I didn't connect with this first book nearly as much as I did with the Farseer books. With those, I think partially because it was so character-driven, I think that's why you either like or don't like Farseer. If you connect with Fitz in Farseer, you're going to enjoy it because it's so character-driven. This was a more broad storyline, and I do feel like it's hard to even say this because I love Farseer, but I think the writing is probably better here. The pacing, the flow is fantastic. This book, my version at least, is 880 pages, and it doesn't read like that. I flew through this. I had no problem hitting 100 plus pages a day, which is not normally something that I necessarily do. I had no problems doing it with this book because it just flowed so well. And so even though I didn't connect to it as much as I thought I would, it was just kind of so well written that it didn't bother me. I enjoyed reading the story, and I assume with the ending too, definitely really upped the ante for some characters. But I assume like I'll feel more invested in it a little bit later, but it's just so well written that it's worth reading anyway. I think that's the thing. A couple of people were saying as they were a couple hundred pages in, it wasn't really clicking at. And I get that, because a couple hundred pages in, we're still kind of like introducing what's going on. This is Robb and Hobb. It's very long, but it's just the prose is fantastic. Hobb is a just fantastic author. She is so good, and her prose is amazing, and it just makes the book enjoyable to read quite a lot. And with everything that she manages to do with one book, albeit a very long book, I don't mind having the slow build-up because it sets so much up. And this book, this is very much a book one. There's a good plot. Some things are actually pretty predictable because Robb and Hobb doesn't necessarily try to trick you and have twists. There are definitely things that don't turn out the way that you think they will, but a lot of it's just the way she's writing the story. It makes it kind of evident what's going to happen. She's showing you there's these little hints and clues and bits of foreshadowing, and sometimes it's a little more obvious where you can see, oh, this is exactly what's going to happen. Part of that also is because of her strength of an author of showing you where it's going. And it's, I do sometimes if something's too predictable and it feels like they're trying to make it not predictable, that can annoy me, but this seems very intentional, and kind of like I commented with Malice, that was a book that a lot of it was kind of predictable where it was going in that first book, but the pacing and the writing was good enough that it didn't bother me that much, and then it was to set up bigger things going a very, very different way later on, which also just was really, really good with the way that that was written. And so those are kind of some of my big plot points that I wanted to talk about with Ship of Magic. I do want to talk about the characters, and I'll do that a little bit spoiler-free, and then I am going to have to probably talk spoilers. I haven't decided yet. I'll note I'm going to. But let's talk about some of the characters, because I mentioned that Wintrow was one of my favorites. His plot just goes in kind of a very different way than what was expected. Kennett was a lot of fun to read as well, but I really want to talk about Kyle Haven because of how unique the character is in some ways and not in others. And let's get in. Let's talk about the curious case of Kyle Haven and his character. All right, so Kyle Haven, who is, just to kind of recap, I think I mentioned a little bit, but Kyle Haven, who married into the Vestrit family, married Keffria, the eldest surviving child of Ephron and Ronica Vestrit. And he so then becomes the captain of the Liveship Vivacia, which is basically the big part of the plot point. Everything is revolving around Vivacia, the ship. Althea wants it. Kyle gets it. He needs an actual family member on board because of reasons with the life ships. And so it's this whole bunch of thing. But immediately we're told, basically through the story, when you're reading it, you see like, oh, I'm supposed to root for Althea and I'm supposed to not like Kyle. And Kyle is not really a nice guy. It's especially funny because Kyle being like a jokingly like a name for somebody who's like punches drywall and stuff came much later. So I love that it's Kyle in this. But Kyle is not a nice guy, and he's often really rude and mean and does all kinds of bad things. But it's the fact that the way he is crafted, because right off the bat, we're reading this book about live ships, and we're given these little tidbits about the traders and all of the backstory that only is just starting to be revealed. So there's all these things that we don't know. And Kyle doesn't either. He's not from Bingtown. He came from elsewhere, and we learn that with Bingtown and the trader families, they very, very closely guard their secrets. Often traders marry with other traders. children here and there. And so it's a very, very tight-knit, secretive community. So he doesn't really understand a lot of these things. He's been a sailor, but he didn't serve on a live ship before. He doesn't really understand fully what a live ship is. Neither do we. And he starts kind of spouting off different negative things about different characters. And even though he doesn't do it in a great way, more than often, he actually tends to be somewhat right. So he's kind of posed as, I feel like he plays the role of the reader, just instead of you reading it and taking seriously because it's fantasy, he almost is like, you think of just a normal person, and then you start telling them all these mystical things, and they're like, that's stupid. You're just being dumb. It's a ship's a ship. And he kind of plays that role. And so I don't like Kyle, and I couldn't bring myself to like Kyle, but I did think he was a fascinating character because of the way that things played out. And from here, I'm gonna talk into a little bit more spoilers because I want to get more specific about Kyle and things that he does, and just some of the other different things in the book that I really liked that are going to be spoilers. So check the description down below, and I will have a timestamp where you can skip to the end where I'll kind of summarize after the spoiler part. But from this point on until at timestamp, there will be some spoilers. So getting deeper with Kyle, I mentioned that he tends to write about a lot of things. Right off the bat, he tells us that Althea is just spoiled. She doesn't actually really know nearly as much about sailing as she thinks, and would really not last as a sailor, and is just basically an irresponsible child. She's like in her 20s, but that's kind of how he phrases it. And he also does not like who had been the mate for Althea's father, Ephron, before he had died, Brashen. Doesn't like him. Seems to think he's just kind of a, good for nothing, and all he's interested in is Althea. And these things seem like, oh no, that's not the case at all. But then we find out through the story, and even, I will say, Althea kind of admits herself as she grows as a person, that she realizes that in a lot of ways she was spoiled. She just kind of went, did her thing, did whatever she felt like on the ship, never really had any real responsibilities, went around spending money even though the family is broke. And she realizes that, oh, I was just kind of spoiled, and ooh, I don't know nearly as much about sailing as I thought. So while that's a character growth moment for Althea, it's interesting going back and seeing that, oh, so everything Kyle said was actually correct, even though he wasn't nice about it, but he was right. And with Brashen later, as we find out that, and there were hints of it, that he was kind of disowned by his family because of, gambling and drinking and drug use and this kind of thing. And basically, Ephron Vestrit was the only person to even give him a chance, and he kind of had a soft spot for him too. But as we see, even though he claims he never did any of it while he was serving on Vivacia, he falls right back into drinking and gambling and using Sinden, the drug that sits here and burns you and everything, and also some different things as well. And it seemed like early on that Hobb was kind of showing you that, oh, it was going to be Althea and Brashen, we're going to have a romance, and they were going to get the Vivacia and be happy, and it's not really how it plays out. Althea does end up doing and it was stated, it was one of those things where you knew it was going to happen, because Brashen makes an offhand comment that she could just basically become a boy, or be reborn as a boy, so she pretends to be a boy on a ship. He ends up on the same ship, and later, while they had both been hit on the head, drugged, and then they're both using Sinden, they have sex. And it's he seems to be fully, he's super into it, but he's fully aware of that, Althea's on drugs and drugged and everything, and he even gave her more drugs, and it's just kind of a weird scene. Oh, and then later he seems to think it meant a whole lot more than she does, and it's kind of thing oh, so maybe Kyle was right about that too. So just Kyle being right about things happened quite a lot, and it really also kind of happened a little bit with Wintrow, where he tells Wintrow, look, you'll be on the ship, you'll get used to it, you'll understand the path that I'm trying to set for you with being a sailor. You'll be happier. You'll get to know the tasks. You have the camaraderie. And that does start to happen. Granted, things change, but it's just you can't say that Kyle's thoughts are coming out of nowhere. There are definitely other things. He's pretty old-fashioned. We learn where he's from. It's kind of the very much, you know, the man of the house is the man of the house, and the women should just do whatever he wants and respect him. So that's one of the things where, like, okay, yeah, that's going too far. It does make sense somewhat with the time period, because that was a thing that happened where it was the man's completely in charge, so you can understand that as well. But he comes in and tries to take over, and the Vestrit family, because he's now the man, and we find out that Veronica didn't realize this was going to happen, and she's all like freaking out that he's going to do all these things. Granted, it is kind of like she hasn't really explained to him. He probably wouldn't listen, but she hasn't really explained to him a lot of the reasons why things he were doing was a problem. But we find out that his wife, Catfrey, absolutely just wanted to be that, you know, trophy wife where she doesn't have to do anything, and he takes care of everything, and that's what she wanted, and didn't want to do anything. And there's drama too with her daughter Malta, who I'm not even going to talk about Malta, because Malta I hate it a lot. She's like a 12-year-old girl, and I shouldn't hate her as much as I did, but oh my gosh, I hated Malta. But with that too, him talking about the finances and I'm not doing well monetarily, he sees everything he's doing as the right thing. And in so many ways, it's like he makes good points. It's kind of the meme with, like, when the supervillain is talking, they start making sense. Really, like, he makes good points. He goes about things in a terrible, terrible way most of the time, if not all of the time. But I thought it was such a fascinating character for him to be such the obvious, like, we don't like this guy, but also make so much sense so you can see where he's coming from, and show that the other characters do have a lot of flaws as well, and sometimes just don't realize them. But, you know, the guy who just yells, like, you suck, you know, that's still not a guy you're going to like, even if he's right, and you do. It's just kind of an interesting thing. And the big thing that was brought up, and this is just me, it wasn't made clear in Ship of Magic, but this is something I think actually happened, was there was a point where, granted, a lot of things happened that go terribly wrong. So we have, after the whole thing with Wintrow losing his finger, Kyle kind of, he seems really freaked out there, but he does kind of explain to Wintrow as well, in his world, why he thinks Wintrow is doing the wrong thing, and it builds his bridge. But after Wintrow runs away and gets branded a slave, and there's the whole thing with Torg not telling Kyle, so he couldn't go get him sooner, and Kyle kind of making an offhand comment, like, why don't we just brand him to the ship's slave so that the ship will own him? And he immediately regrets it, to be fair, like, immediately regrets it. But later on the ship, he just kind of loses it all of a sudden and just, like, attacks and tries to kill Wintrow. And even later, he's like, why? He doesn't understand why he got so angry. I actually think that it's going to turn out that Vivacia actually was kind of, like, affecting him through the bond, because she was so angry at Wintrow, and Wintrow had run away from her and didn't want to be there, and it's becoming more clear, despite meeting Paragon, the mad ship in Ship of Magic, that the mad ship that we're talking about might actually be Vivacia, the way that she's going, potentially. But I wonder if that's not the case, because he has hit Wintrow, but that was kind of an extreme reaction, and so I'm kind of wondering about that. If she was trying to, like divide them more, or if she was just lashing out, because the ship Vivacia very much has a personality and is not a very healthy one at the time. But so that, I think, remains to be seen. But I loved how a lot of the stories came together, and you could see very early on how they were going to come together, because you had Captain Kenneth the pirate. His goal is he wants a life ship, and his first mate Sorkor, he wants to kill slavers and free slaves. So when we find out Vivacia is a live ship who Kyle's going to start using as a slave ship, really, really evident where that was going to end up. But we had Kyle and Wintrow in that story, and Kenneth, that combination with Vivacia, who's a really interesting character all on her own, and especially in Book 2, I think we're really going to explore her relationships with others based on the way Ship of Magic ended. But getting to see all of the interactions there was really great. And then Althea and Brashen, we saw them together, but then she is still plotting to try and get Vivacia back, which will be interesting to see with it now being captured. But she kind of went off on her own path and didn't really do what we expected. And most of the plot lines, though, converged around Vivacia. We had with Wintrow, of course, we had Kenneth, we had even the Sea Serpents who are around, and who are thinking that somehow Vivacia is more than a ship, which also makes you wonder about how they make live ships, which could definitely be something that we see more of, which would be really interesting. But everything combining together for the most part, and also just the deeper mystery of the Rain Wilds traders and the Rain Wilds, I'm really excited to find out more there. But with the ending, not only was it just great, and Wintrow at the end was so awesome with the way he handled everything. He kind of still did things, didn't want to take responsibility, but then he's like, you know what, I gotta step up and do these things, even if it's not what literally anyone else wants. I'm gonna do what I think is right. Was fantastic. And then just Captain Kenna and his interactions with Vivacia were fantastic. I loved them. And then Etta and her interactions with Vivacia too. I think all of that's going to be so great in book 2. And I am really excited. The ending was definitely, it really built me up. But like I said, this book is just, honestly, the book was so well written that there were probably some flaws in here, but I just enjoyed reading this very, very thoroughly. I flew through it, and as I commented, some of the descriptions didn't really sound that much like something I'd want to read, but we do get a lot of different ships that we get to see, seafaring and pirates, and we also get a lot of like Victorian-era household drama, but Hobb could probably write about anything. I've enjoyed this so much, and it was really good, and the characters are so very strong as well. Even though we're not focusing on just one character, and I was amazed by how well she was able to develop other characters through only one POV, this is where she really is doing this kind of sprawling big story with really high page count and kind of exploring the world, touching on things very, very briefly that have happened in Farseer, but really telling this completely different kind of story with very, very different characters. And it's just very fantastically done. I do think that this, if you are a person who didn't like Farseer because it was too slow with the pacing, especially in books 1 and 3, I don't think you'll run into a problem here as much. It is kind of a little slow to start, I'd say, for the first couple hundred pages, when it's just kind of still the rising action, basically the foreground and getting things where they need to go. But overall, this just flowed very, very well, and it wasn't even that noticeable to me that some things were slower. And anytime you get to like a really passage that's like, okay, seems like it might be slowing down, no, it does not. So I feel like for people who had issues with that, this may be better to start with. At least for the first book, it doesn't really spoil anything for Farseer so far. I've heard some people have said maybe the way it ends or some other events does have some spoilers for Farseer. I'll update if I find that. I haven't found that yet. But I am very excited to be reading the next 2 books in the Liveship Traders trilogy over the next 2 months. And I can't wait. Once again, a reminder that on Friday, April 2nd, Megan's Reading Revelations will be having a live show. I'll put a link to that. Originally I was supposed to be a part. I had to back out, but actually Andrew is going to be taking my place on that too. So I'm really excited to watch the replay for that. And I'll definitely be on the next 2 for Mad Ship and Ship of Destiny because if you've reached the end of the video, obviously I had a lot to say about this book, and I think I'll have even more probably about the next book. So I'm really excited to get there. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like. Leave a comment. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my thoughts. I know there's definitely some differing opinions on some of the things I said, and especially since I focused a fair amount on Kyle, definitely let me know your thoughts. If you would like to see more of my content, then don't forget to, of course, subscribe.